Now, I didn't think I needed to be concerned about Penn State's defense, but there might be more issues than people realize.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football. Thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listening watch every single day. My name is Zach Seyko, and I am your host of the show. We're going to discuss potentially the issues that Penn State's defense is facing for the 2025 season. So whether that's defensive line, linebacker, getting to know Jim Knowles' defense. As always, I'd really appreciate a like on this episode. Share it with friends and family. If you're new to the show, subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcast. Most importantly, be a part of the conversation down in the comments section. Let's begin with the biggest issue that I've already outlined, but it needs addressed, and that is defensive tackle depth. You have Zane Durant. He's your superstar. This defense, and there's going to be a lot of back and forth here between the issues, but there is a lot of great to this Penn State defense. There's star power on this defense. So guys like Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, specifically at defensive tackle. But after that, it's a lot of uncertainty. At defensive tackle, Alonzo Ford's going to be that other starter, that co-starter next to Zane Durant. And the hope is that he will be able to return to full strength. Because remember, he had a season-ending injury in 2024, didn't get the chance to play in the postseason. Penn State could have really used him. And now Durant and Ford do combine for this electric 1-2 punch. Probably, arguably, one of the better defensive tackle duos, because I can't make the argument right now because I'm not familiar with every single defensive tackle duo in the Big Ten. But I think it's safe to say that Alonzo Ford and Zane Durant, if both of them are healthy, could create the best duo. They could. I think it's safe to say they're top three just by their talent alone. But does Ford return to full strength? How quickly does it? I think he does, but how quickly does he get back to, game speed and everything else? What is his timeline ultimately through three? Are we going to see him in spring ball, right? This was, from what we gathered, kind of a long-term injury here. So what is his outlook? He will be ready for fall, but what is his timeline and how can he be ready sooner rather than later? Can he be back to full strength sooner rather than later? But it's the depth, most importantly. And that's the thing. If you lose a Zane Durant to injury for a portion of time, and I have to speak in the hypothetical because this is a reality of it, or Alonzo Ford, you had Keziah Izzard, Devon J. Thomas, Alonzo Ford, and Zane Durant last season, which created a really strong two deep part of the depth chart at defensive tackle. You don't have that. Everybody else is unproven. Xavier Gilliam has received some praise alongside a Ty Blanding, but when Alonzo Ford was unavailable last season and there was chatter about, okay, would Gilliam or Blanding see some serious action going into the remainder of the season? And they never did. Yes, they played some snaps, but not meaningful snaps. So what is the trustworthy factor going into this season? Are they going to be able to take a step forward? They might. Those are former strong recruits, but are they developing the way that they should? I think somebody to keep an eye on. He was dealing with an injury last season and probably redshirted to add some weight. Liam Andrews is so talented just in the game of football that he could have played either offensive line or defensive line. He settled at defensive line. I like Andrews' athleticism. I like just his pure strength. He's a pure athlete, but he definitely needed to bulk up. And if he's not ready to go in terms of his size, right now he's currently listed at 6'4", 275 pounds. And I think he's caught up to play that role where Penn State has two different types of defensive tackles. They have the pure run stuffer, which is going to be the Alonzo Ford types, guys that are going to weigh over 300 pounds. And then the more athletic, they can play three downs. And it's not that Ford or anybody else couldn't, but you want to be strategic. You have one defensive tackle that is larger, that takes up space, takes on double teams. And then guys like Zane Durant, and Liam Andrews fits this category where you want him to be a pure three-down defensive tackle rushing after the passer as well because they have that athleticism. They're essentially a bigger defensive end moved into the middle of the defense. But that's a what if. How is he developing after dealing with an injury in his true freshman season in his first year? Xavier Gilliam has promise, but when does that promise kick in? They picked up Owen Wafel in the transfer portal. This is another player that a rotational player. I don't know that he's an immediate backup to a Zane Durant and an Alonzo Ford. So there is a big spring football battle right here brewing for both second defensive tackle spots, for both of the backup spots. And if Alonzo Ford isn't ready right away, a starting defensive tackle spot. Penn State was in the market, in the transfer portal the first time around, the winter transfer portal window, for a defensive tackle. That tells me everything that I need to know. And that was a starting caliber defensive tackle. This was in addition to Owen Wafel, who was the redshirt freshman coming over from Michigan. They were looking at David Blay, who ultimately, he went to Miami of Florida. He was transferring from Louisiana Tech. And this is somebody that Penn State is just looking for reliable options. So after Zane Durant and Alonzo Ford, it's not there. Let me talk about a couple other concerns, but we'll address them throughout the show. Kobe King vacates the Mike linebacker spot. Jim Knowles comes in with this complex defense. And the worry is, I guess the outside worry, I can't say that here, which is why I'm going to address it, that Ohio State fans made it very clear that Jim Knowles' defense take a lot of time and there's an adjustment period and you're not going to learn this overnight. I don't think they're going to learn it overnight, but I think Penn State is well prepared to take on a Jim Knowles defense and be better prepared with it sooner rather than later. But I think of players like Kobe King, Jalen Reed, that leave these vacancies on the defense that certainly need addressed. And in Jim Knowles' 4-2-5 defense, particularly with the absence of a player like Jalen Reed, that's the X factor. In a 4-2-5, that additional safety is that X factor, and it's why Tom Allen played so many different hybrids just to rotate players in. So that third safety, in addition to the free and the strong safety, that lion position is the X factor here for maximizing Jim Knowles' defense. So let's address it all here in the upcoming segments. Penn State's defensive line, as for defensive tackle, is not in a great spot. It's the depth chart, and you have star power with Zane Durant, and when Alonzo Ford is back to 100%, that is an awesome 1-2 punch and one of the better ones. I think top 3 conservatively in the Big Ten. But if they're unable to remain healthy throughout the season, what are your options after that? And it's just that. A lot of question marks that Penn State's probably going to need to address in the transfer portal. Now, where do the linebackers stand? Because I actually think the linebackers are in a solid spot. They lose Kobe King, but Tony Rojas returns. Dom DeLuca is going to be a 3-time captain. They get this key player back. Linebacker is set up very nicely, much better than it was in 2024 compared to 2024, and I'll tell you why on the other side of this break. And today's episode is brought to you by Supply House. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades. Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts, that's right, 200,000 parts from 400 plus of the top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Do you need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and an industry-leading service, so you always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trademaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage, and now it is your turn. Join the Trademaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, or electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5, that is SH5, for 5% off your first order. That is supplyhouse.com. I actually like where things stand with Penn State's linebackers, and Penn State runs the 4-2-5, so they only need to rely on them 2 at a time. But between Tony Rojas coming back for his 3rd season, I think he takes a massive leap forward. Dom DeLuca comes back as that veteran, and then The player that I hinted at going into break, Penn State gets Keon Wiley back at full strength, and that is massive. That is not one that should be overlooked at all. Penn State, you now have a 3-man rotation where they can all move around the 2 linebacker spots together. Now, I understand Dom DeLuca's that strong side. He's the bigger linebacker, the run stuffer. But Keon Wiley and Tony Rojas can be these hybrid linebackers where you could have both of them on the field at the same time. You could shift and rotate in Dom DeLuca. All 3 of these players are capable of defending the pass very well, but Dom DeLuca is traditionally more of your run-stuffing linebacker. He can set the edge, so it's kind of dependent on formation and the look that Penn State opponents are going to give them when they're on defense. If you have a spread offense, you're facing more along the lines of, say, a USC, and I know they don't face these teams, but just as examples. When you face a USC, they're going to go 3, 4, 5 wide receivers traditionally. You're going to want to have Keon Wiley and Tony Rojas on the field for the most part. But again, even still, Dom DeLuca is not a liability in pass coverage. I've lost count of how many pick sixes he has by himself, including one in the postseason. Tony Rojas did too. So those guys are all capable in pass coverage. But if you're facing a team that is more efficient in the ground game, like in Illinois, for example, you're going to want to make sure that you have Dom DeLuca. And Penn State's not entirely right. They're not fully entrenched in the 4-2-5 where they have to run it the entirety of a game. They can shift and have 3 linebackers on the field if it permits it, if the opportunity permits itself. So Penn State is going to run a 4-2-5, and we're also going to talk about that too. Who's going to be that Lion player? That is the X factor in a Jim Knowles defense. But where linebacker stands, I like the 3 that are going to be the primary starters, play a bulk of the snaps. But then even behind them, Dakari Nelson shifting over from safety now gets that full season of development under his belt as a true linebacker. Tamir Robinson, another year for him. Anthony Speca, Kari Jackson. A lot of these players just have been either dealing with changes to their player profile, like a Dakari Nelson. He has to go through that developmental stage to add on the extra weight. And I know he was a strong safety, but to get him fully acclimated at linebacker, that takes time. Not everybody's Abdul Carter where it seems like they learn a position change practically in just a couple of months there. Besides the point, but Nelson's now had that full time to get situated. Tamir Robinson was dealing with injuries last season. He gets another season of experience. Anthony Speca himself, not necessarily injuries, but somebody that gets more experience. And then Kari Jackson. These players are talented, but they've just been dealing with bumps and bruises. Even Tony Rojas was dealing with bumps and bruises a season ago, and that's why at times he didn't look 100%. So this linebacker group, when you compare it to 2024, we'll see if I can call it a true strength, but it's certainly not a weakness. I think Tony Rojas becomes one of those superstars on the defense. Denai Dennis-Sutton, Zane Durant, that is a great start for Penn State. Zach Wheatley as well, AJ Harris, and then Tony Rojas starts to move into that category as well. I don't know that it'll be in the first couple of games. It doesn't need to be. But by the time the midpoint of the season rolls around, when you get to that Ohio State game, that's where you really want him to go from good and reliable to great to game-changing. And I think that's still on the horizon for a Tony Rojas. Keon Wiley, if things go well for him, he is not devoid of talent either. I won't necessarily sit here and claim that, yes, he is a superstar in the making like a Tony Rojas, but he can be your above average linebacker like a Dom DeLuca, but in a different way. There was a lot of optimism for Keon Wiley before he sustained that long-term injury. So the hope's still there that Keon Wiley can be an impact type of player and not just somebody that rotates in. That's why there's discussions. Okay, do you start Keon Wiley and Tony Rojas? And starting lineups don't necessarily matter. Think of snap count. So even if Dom DeLuca isn't the first one out there on defense for the first series, look at snap counts above all else. So starting lineups are one thing, but it's how much somebody is playing. But then you have the depth to back all of that up. Dakari Nelson, Tamir Robinson, Anthony Speca, Kari Jackson. And we'll see if true freshmen like an Alex Tatch or LeVar Arrington II, all eyes are going to be on him since he was given that number 11. All eyes are going to be on him. How do they develop as true freshmen going into this season? So linebackers in a solid spot, but they are going to be relied on more heavily if defensive tackle is somewhat of a letdown or isn't as strong as it needs to be. Because that's kind of the issue of the 4-2-5 is it's a hybrid to stop hybrid offenses. It's able to have a balance of being able to stop the run and stop the pass simultaneously so that you don't have to constantly make substitutions or make shifts. You can ultimately do it. And that's where those coverage disguises and everything else. And Jim Knowles is the architect of this. He is the man to run the 4-2-5 defense. But you need defensive tackles to be aggressive up front, and if they're not as strong, then it's the linebackers, but there's only 2 of them. And then that's where the X factor comes into play. That lion called the rover traditionally in a base 4-2-5 defense, the X factor of this all is who is going to take over Jalen Reed's spot. And I know he moved back to strong safety because of the absence of KJ Winston due to injury, but when Jalen Reed was at his best during the season, it was playing close to the line of scrimmage, and he was able to handle those responsibilities, and that's really what makes this defense go. And for Jim Knowles, you need a strong player there. Who is that strong player? Who fills that void? Who fills that gap that Jalen Reed is leaving behind? Penn State losing Kobe King at linebacker is one thing. I think Dom DeLuca, Keon Wiley, and Tony Rojas in this rotation of 3 will be able to do just fine because it's not ideal to lose Kobe King. I would have liked Penn State to have had Kobe King come back for another season. It's just the more the merrier. Then you have 2 full sets of 2 linebackers on a 2-deep depth chart. A lot of 2s there. But the 4-2-5 can be made or broken by that rover, the lion, in Penn State's edition of it. So who is that player? Can they handle the responsibility? Is that a big question mark and holds this defense back? Plus, learning Jim Knowles' defense. That's a tall task according to Ohio State fans. We're going to break it all down here coming up next on Locked On Nittany Lions. So this is another concern, potential concern. Who takes over that lion role as that extra, because this is what the 4-2-5 is. Okay, you have 4 defensive linemen, you have 2 linebackers, you have 5 defensive backs, but it's that lion. It's that player that is close to the line of scrimmage, and why they're so important is because they have to be somewhat of a superstar in their own right with the way that they can handle being able to defend against the pass, being able to guard a slot receiver while simultaneously being able to take on that pulling guard. So one of the weaknesses of the 4-2-5 is that if you get a guard or a pulling tackle, anybody, if you get a pulling lineman out in space and you match him up on that defensive back, Jalen Reed was so good and he's so good at football to begin with because he is gifted in his natural ability, his physical ability. He's 6 foot, 215 pounds, 210, 215 pounds, give or take. That is your ideal player. He is the prototype of player that you want at that rover linebacker position, because he has the size to take on a block from whatever it is, a tight end, a guard, whatever have you. And I know a 300-pound pulling guard is going to beat 9 times out of 10 that smaller defensive back. But when you're Jalen Reed, that's where your football skills come into play. But he has the size. So I think of players like a Zion Tracy that I don't know, because of the build, I don't know if I trust Tracy to play as that lion. And I don't know that he will. But this is where King Mack is important. King Mack returns to Penn State. Return of the Mack. I've heard it already. But his return to Happy Valley is important because he gives you a player with that ability to cover the slot receiver while at the same time being that extra defender down in the box. And I know he's listed at 5'9". He is not the tallest player in the world. However, he does have solid size, weighing around 190 pounds, and maybe he's officially listed at 5'10", but 190 pounds, and maybe he adds on a little more weight. He's somebody that could factor into this. I don't even know that Penn State chooses him as the lion necessarily, or maybe they could have a competition between the two. Dejon Lane is maybe the X factor in all of this. Lane, they burned his red shirt. They thought Dejon Lane was ready to go last season, and then they gradually, upped his workload. We never really saw it. Kind of like Tyser Denmark. Lane was generating buzz on the defensive side. Denmark was generating buzz on the offensive side. But those two players never really materialized the way we thought they would in year one. But now it's year two. You go through winter workouts again. You go through spring football practices. You go through summer. And then by the time you get to fall, you get that full season, that full off season of development, which is going to be crucial for Tyser Denmark himself. But for the case of this conversation, Dejon Lane. Dejon Lane fits that mold, in my opinion, because he's 6'2". He's 210 pounds. He can take on the tight end. He can take on the guard, even though the guard or the center, whomever, the linemen are going to naturally be bigger at 290, 300 pounds. I get that. But Dejon Lane is built more so for that than a Zion Tracy or a King Mack. So Zach Wheatley is your staple at free safety. He's one of those star players, one of the faces of the defense. Okay, that takes care of that. And then on the corners, this is where, and we're going to talk about Jim Knowles' defense as a whole. Jim Knowles' defense is complex because of the coverages, the disguises, the formations, and people's responsibilities. You have to be able to know your responsibility down to a T. But isn't that all of Division I football? Penn State's not going to be asked to do anything necessarily that they haven't been asked to do before. Is there going to be a wrinkle or two that they need to get used to? Absolutely. But Ohio State, anybody that, whether it's a reporter or somebody that covers the team or a fan that says, well, good luck, Penn State, you're not going to be able to handle Jim Knowles' defense in year one. Yes, they can. It's because the secondary overall might be one of the biggest strengths on this team. There's offensive line, there's running back, but secondary, with where Penn State is loaded at secondary, they have options to have an open competition at the Lions spot. They are secure at free safety, at cornerback, and Jim Knowles' defense. You need to be able to run. You need to be as good as you can be in man-to-man coverage. Well, guess what? They have A.J. Harris. A.J. Harris, I think, is in that superstar category, is in that star category. All conference, if things go well, all America. That's what I think of A.J. Harris. Elliott Washington continues to be one of the winter workout warriors for Penn State. I think Elliott Washington is poised to have a big season. Those two can handle man-to-man coverage on the boundary. You have Zion Tracy who can come in, Davian Collins, right? Penn State just has options. You bring back King Mack. You have Zach Wheatley as that center field, roaming, free safety, reading the eyes of the quarterback. And then Dejon Lane, who fits into this Lion role. Again, we'll see what Penn State ultimately decides here. Bottom line is, Penn State has options. Penn State has good options, and some of them teetering on elite. I like where Penn State's secondary is. Penn State ran the 4-2-5 last season with Tom Allen calling plays. Penn State is not going to have this large learning curve where they can adjust to Jim Knowles' defense. They have a head start and then some. And with how strong the secondary is, Penn State, really, the biggest issue is just defensive tackle depth. I like the linebackers. I like the secondary. And I don't think Penn State's going to have any issues adjusting to Jim Knowles' defense as much as people make them out to be. Are there going to be periods? Is there going to be a learning period? Yes. Are there going to be some adjustments that need to be made early on? Absolutely. But the most important part, when you get down to crunch time, when you got to clinch a conference title berth, when you got to make your statement for the college football playoff, when you get to the final portion of the season, those final 4 games, there's not going to be any lapses there for that Penn State defense. If for the most of the part, if the nucleus is healthy, Penn State's defense under Jim Knowles should be one of the better defenses, but things have to click into place. This is why you have spring football to decide these camp battles, and that's what they are at the end of the day. But Penn State has options. I like King Mack as a starting strong safety. I like Zach. Of course, Zach Wheatley is the free safety, and I think Dejon Lane kind of fits as this new Lion player if he's able to handle the responsibility. But part of it is, too, you have to be one of the smarter football players on the field. That is a tall task for a second-year player, a true sophomore, to handle that. We'll see if Lane is up to the challenge and see what Penn State decides to roll with if they can't rely on him as much as they would like. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Again, thank you so much for checking out this episode. Please leave a like on it. Share it with friends and family. If you're new to the show, subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, be a part of the conversation. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. And for coverage around all your favorite Penn State sports teams, Penn State football, Penn State wrestling, Penn State men's basketball, keep it right here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And again, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. For your second listen and watch, you got to check out Locked On College Basketball with hosts Isaac Shade and Andy Patton. Be an expert on college basketball. Now that the madness is here, it is finally March. You can find Locked On College Basketball available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. It is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day.